Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to absolutely tear down the illusion of the cloud and trace the incredible, both physical and logical journey of a single cross-ocean data request. Using official engineering frameworks from the FCC, the IETF, and the ITU, we're going to reveal the hidden mechanics that literally power our connected world. We're looking way past the abstract concepts today to see the massive, yet surprisingly fragile infrastructure sitting right at the bottom of the sea.
So, let's dive into this by picturing a superordinary action. You pull out your phone and press play on a video. Maybe you send a secure message, or you just save a document to a cloud drive. Now, most of the time, your local internet service provider is going to try to serve that request locally using edge caches or content delivery networks, mostly just to save time and bandwidth. But today, we are going to deliberately bypass that local cache. We're forcing a full transoceanic journey so we can see exactly how a single packet of data travels across the globe, from your hand all the way to another continent.
Here is our official itinerary for today. First, the local cache bypass. Second, the logical routing map. Third, reaching the landing station. Fourth, the subsea optical journey. Fifth, system failure and repair. And lastly, destination and return. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the local cache bypass. Our journey actually begins the exact millisecond you tap your screen. By intentionally bypassing those local application layer caches that usually serve up content instantly, we're forcing your data packet completely out of your local ISP network. We're ejecting it from that comfortable terrestrial bubble so it has to seek its ultimate destination thousands of miles away. Now, you might naturally think, international data travels through the air, probably via satellites, right? Actually, no. According to a congressional research report cited by the FCC, an astonishing 99% of all international data exchange relies on submarine telecom cables. We are talking about the critical infrastructure that facilitates over $1 trillion in daily financial transactions. To put that into perspective, if this underwater network goes down, the global economy literally grinds to a halt. It all happens deep underwater, which makes the balance between its immense global importance and its physical fragility incredibly stark. To truly wrap our heads around this global machine, we have to separate our entire system into 3 distinct layers, and throughout this journey, we need to keep these completely separate in our minds. First, there's the application layer. That's the actual content and caching we just bypassed. Second, the logical layer, which handles IP and internetwork routing decisions. And third, the physical layer, meaning the actual terrestrial and subsea infrastructure. Right now, our packet needs to navigate layer 2 before it can even think about touching layer 3.
Moving right along to Section 2. The logical routing map. Before a single packet of light can physically travel under the sea, it desperately needs a set of directions to know where it's actually going.
So, how is this route decided? Well, based on the Internet Engineering Task Force's RFC 4271 standard, this whole thing is governed by BGP, or the Border Gateway Protocol. Now, it's absolutely crucial to understand that BGP is strictly an inter-autonomous system reachability and policy mechanism. What that means is, it doesn't just look at a physical geographic map and directly choose a named physical submarine cable for every single packet. It doesn't work like that. Instead, it operates logically. Think of it like a massive global shipping operation. BGP figures out which autonomous network company to hand the data off to next based on established contracts and policies. It simply passes the packet from your access ISP down the chain, kind of like a digital bucket brigade, until it finally reaches the network that owns the destination IP address.
Which brings us to Section 3, reaching the landing station. Once that logical path is decisively set by BGP, our data packet is translated into electrical signals and its physical journey truly begins. It travels through the physical terrestrial backhaul, the fiber optic cables buried under our highways, train tracks, and cities, until it arrives at the absolute edge of the continent. Here at the coast, we hit a hard transition, where the comfortable terrestrial environment ends and the edge of the abyss begins. The FCC officially defines this coastal infrastructure in 2 parts. First, you have the dry plant, which is the cable landing station itself. This highly secure station houses the massive power feed equipment and the submarine line terminal equipment, or SLTE. The SLTE's entire job is to convert those terrestrial electrical signals into distinct optical wavelengths ready for the ocean. This contrasts really sharply with the wet plant, which officially begins outside, right at the beach manhole. Following official Congressional Research Service frameworks, we can track our packet's exact transition here. It leaves your ISP's point of presence, which is basically just their local regional HUD, enters the landing station, gets converted by the SLTE, and drops straight through the beach manhole. And from that incredibly mundane-looking manhole on the shore, our packet enters the hostile aquatic environment of the wet plant, leaving dry land completely behind.
All right, Section 4, the subsea optical journey. Moving completely into the wet plant now, our data is converted into distinct wavelength channels of light, ready to navigate the pitch-black ocean floor at hundreds of thousands of miles per second.
To make this monumental crossing, the physical cable relies on a few absolutely critical components. According to ITU-T guidelines, specifically G978, these delicate optical fibers, which by the way are literally the width of a human hair, must be heavily protected. So they're wrapped in specialized armoring, sometimes double or even rock armoring, just to survive the crushing deep sea pressures and chemical aggression. Now, as the light travels through this glass, it naturally dims over distance, so the system uses submarine repeaters. These are large copper tubes spaced along the route to boost and amplify the signal. And occasionally, the light hits branching units. Think of these as optical splitters resting right on the seafloor, directing different wavelength channels of traffic to entirely different destination countries.
That takes us to Section 5, System Failure and Repair. Because, let's be honest, the ocean is an incredibly hostile, unpredictable environment. Despite all that heavy armoring and brilliant engineering, physical cables can and regularly do break. To give you a real sense of scale here, the International Cable Protection Committee reported over 200 cable repairs worldwide in 2023 alone. If you do the math, that equates to an average of more than 3 total cable failures every single week, which is just mind-blowing for a system carrying 99% of our international data. According to KISS Orca marine maintenance data, in waters shallower than 200 meters, about 70% of these faults are man-made. We're mostly talking about fishing trawlers dragging their nets or ship anchors dropping right on the cables. But out in the deep, pitch-black ocean, the culprits are usually severe natural hazards, like underwater landslides or massive seismic earthquakes. So, let's look at the official KISO RCA marine maintenance sequence to see how this builds into a really dramatic repair operation. When a break happens, the terminal stations first conduct electrical fault testing to estimate a rough location. Immediately, a specialized repair vessel is mobilized. Once they're on site in the open ocean, the crew uses electrosighting or a remotely operated vehicle to precisely locate the fault. Then comes the wild part. They lower a massive cutting grapnel down to the seafloor to snag and recover the severed ends. They are literally pulling a multi-ton cable up from miles underwater onto a rocking ship. On board, the damaged section is cut out, and a pristine new segment painstakingly spliced in, aligning those hair-thin fibers entirely by hand. After rigorous testing confirms the connection is good, the heavy splice is lowered back down, and an ROV uses high-pressure water jets to dig a trench for reburial, finally protecting the repair. And finally, Section 6, Destination and Return. With the connection painstakingly restored by that repair crew working silently out on the waves, our delayed data pulse is free to complete its massive ocean crossing. The packet of light finally hits the destination landing station's beach manhole, is converted back into terrestrial signals by the destination's SLTE, and traverses the receiving network. It successfully hits the destination server, fetches your video or cloud document, and seamlessly routes the requested data back through this exact same global gauntlet. From the server, back to the landing station, across the freezing ocean floor, up to your ISP, and right into your device. And what is truly mind-bending about all of this is that assuming there wasn't a physical cable break delaying it, this entire global chain of logical BGP handoffs and physical transoceanic light pulses happens in a fraction of a single second. Ultimately, this explainer proves that the cloud isn't some invisible magic. It's a physical, heavy, and surprisingly fragile marvel sitting right at the bottom of the ocean. It's a chain of logical decisions and physical glass, constantly held together by ships working silently in the dark, just waiting for your next click. But as our global data demands continue to skyrocket and the ocean floor becomes increasingly crowded with competing infrastructure, how long can this delicate underwater web keep up with the world above? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.